All right, go ahead.
Mrs. Silva, are you familiar with a company called Ace Protective Group?
Yes.
And do they provide security services for the ranch?
Yes.
That's in addition to the regular staff that's on the ranch?
We used them as contract. The employees were supervised, managed on the ranch, and they officially paid payroll services.
Were they just used for special occasions or were they there all the time?
No, they were used from the time period of, I believe, 1997 through 2003, I believe.
So, for instance, somebody who was working as a security officer on the ranch during that time period, they would actually be employed by the Ace Protective Group as opposed to MJJ Productions or the defendant.
Yes, some were.
And some were not?
Some were not.
But they all worked under your supervision?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, let's talk a little bit about the ranch. You described some behavior where Gavin Arvizo crashed in a golf cart.
Yes.
That happened. I believe Mr. Sanger showed us it was in, as I recall, June of 2002.
Yes.
And there's no log entry in any of the logs in 2003 that indicate that Gavin ever had his driving privileges taken away on the golf carts, are there?
I would have to look at the gate logs to see. I believe what the report said was that a verbal warning was given.
In 2002?
Yes.
Yes. We had that report.
Yes.
But to your knowledge, you don't recall any situation where Gavin Arvizo was later, during the time in 2003 while they were on the ranch, deprived of his privileges to drive golf carts, correct?
In 2003, he did have a golf cart taken away from him.
Do you recall what date that was?
It was written on the same line where I believe there was an accident that happened that involved Mr. Brando's grandson. As a result of that accident, the golf carts were taken away.
And your recollection is it was taken away from Gavin and from Shane?
Yes.
So it would be that accident report?
Pardon me?
It would be that accident report, correct?
I believe that incident, the golf carts were temporarily taken away from them.
You've described a situation where, I believe, in the past that you thought that at one point or another, every one of the young boys that would visit that ranch got carried away, correct?
Not all of them, but I would say they had fun.
Do you recall a conversation that you had with a sheriff's department detective?
Yes.
And do you recall him asking you about the conduct of a couple of young boys?
Yes.
And you said to him that they all did. At one point or another, they would all have to calm down, and we'd all have to take things away from them, all of them.
I would say there was an occasion where all of them needed to be reminded of what the rules were.
So you didn't tell them that on all occasions, eventually somebody had to have something taken away from them?
The way you asked the question, I believe what you're asking me is every single person has had a golf cart taken away. Is that what you're asking?
No, just the young boys.
One occasion we would have to remind them, again, to follow the rules.
And you said that, you thought the reason for that was because the children felt there was so much freedom at Neverland Ranch, correct?
Yes.
And you also said that you never saw Mr. Jackson ever tell the children to calm down or not do anything, correct?
Yes.
And you told the officer that you felt that at times you were forced to be the bad guy because Mr. Jackson wouldn't do that when you thought he should. Isn't that correct?
He's the host, so that's not his job.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. It calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
I didn't hear what his reply is.
You should rephrase the question. It was complicated.
You also told the investigator that you felt it was unfair at times that you and your security officers were placed in a bad position because Mr. Jackson would not discipline people?
Objection. Calls for hearsay.
In his presence, correct?
In his presence, it wouldn't be appropriate for him, as a host, to discipline. That would be our job. So he was relying on us to do our job.
Did you tell the officer that you felt that Mr. Jackson had placed you in a position of being the bad guys?
Sure.
Now, you stated that you had no personal knowledge about reports of children being intoxicated on the ranch, correct?
Correct.
As a head of security, do you review the logs all the time?
At the end of the week I review them.
And you discuss with your staff any concerns about things that may be going on the ranch to make sure everything's okay?
On a daily basis.
You did receive some reports, did you not, that there were children intoxicated on the ranch?
I did not receive any direct report, someone coming to me and reporting that they found someone intoxicated.
But you had information to that effect, did you not, as the head of security?
There is always a concern for it, because there's alcohol available, so we would take precautions to make sure that that wouldn't happen.
I think the question was, did you have did you have knowledge of the fact from your staff that there were incidents where they encountered children intoxicated?
I was not.
Excuse me. Calls for hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
I think that's a yes or no.
No.
Are you familiar with a person by the name of Chris Carter?
Yes.
Who is Mr. Carter?
Mr. Carter was a personal assistant, traveling security person for Mr. Jackson.
So when Mr. Jackson was around, Mr. Carter was around. He was his security, correct?
Yes. No, he was not under my supervision.
No, I know. I mean, the jury may not know, but he worked basically for Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
But when Mr. Jackson was at the ranch, Mr. Carter was at the ranch, right?
Most of the time.
And did Miko Brando on occasion also serve as part of the security detail for Mr. Jackson, to your knowledge?
I'm not aware of that.
And have you ever seen Mr. Jackson carry a cell phone?
No.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson use a cell phone?
No.
Did you ever see any of these personal bodyguards loan Mr. Jackson a cell phone to be used?
No.
Now, at the time that the Arvizos came to visit in early February of 2003, did you know that they had come from Miami?
No.
Did you know where they had come from?
No.
Did you know how much clothing they had with them or how long they were expected to stay at the ranch?
No.
Compound. Your Honor. Move to strike the answer.
I'll break it up. Did you know?
Excuse me. I just need a.
He's going to rephrase. Stricken.
So it's stricken. There was a motion to strike the answer.
Stricken.
Did you know how much clothing they brought with them?
No.
Did you know how long they were supposed to stay?
No.
Did you know where they had been before they came to Neverland Ranch?
No.
Did you know that they came to the ranch with the defendant, Mr. Jackson?
I did not see that personally.
But you're aware of that?
Yes.
Now, during the time that the Arvizo children were at the ranch in February of 2003, and in March, you observed Mr. Jackson spend time with the boys, did you not?
I recall Mr. Jackson was there, but I don't recall any specific interaction with them.
You don't recall Mr. Jackson spending time with Gavin Arvizo?
Not specifically.
And during most of this particular point in time, you would be leaving in the early evening hours to go home, correct?
My hours were varied at that time, depending on the coverage that we needed.
Alright, and so, but ordinarily, you would leave to go home in the early evening hours, correct?
No, sir.
So if we were to look at your timesheets, they would reflect the fact that, are you, by the way, filled out on the logs?
Yes.
Your name's on the logs, so we can look at the logs and we can all find out what time you checked in and what time you checked out for the day.
Yes.
That would be an accurate depiction of your work schedule during February and March of 2003?
Yes. Is
that correct?
Yes.
Now, did you basically run things from the administration building?
Depended on the activity. If I had enough officers to cover the shift, then I would come down and supervise the shift and then I'd work from my office. If not, I was part of the rotation as well.
So it's your testimony that you have no recollection of Mr. Jackson being in the presence of Gavin Arvizo, for instance, in the arcade room playing games?
I can't recall specifically.
You have no recollection of Gavin Arvizo being with Mr. Jackson in the movie theater?
I'm sure it was possible, but you're asking me specifically, and I don't remember an occasion. There was a lot of people there during that time, and people were coming and going, so.
I'm just asking what you recall. Do you recall any situation where you recall Gavin Arvizo being with the defendant down in the amusement park?
No.
Do you recall any situation where Gavin Arvizo was with the defendant down at the zoo?
No.
Do you recall any incident or occasions of Mr. Jackson being with Gavin Arvizo around the swimming pool?
No.
Or out at the teepee?
I believe they may have had dinner there once.
It's true, is it not, that Gavin Arvizo spent some of the nights in Mr. Jackson's house?
Yes.
I'm assuming, as one of your chief responsibilities there as the security officer at this point in time in 2003, that you would try to be very proactive about liability issues on the ranch, correct?
Yes.
In other words, sort of like a loss prevention concept. You want to make sure that you run things so that accidents are prevented before they happen, correct?
Yes.
And you put procedures in place to avoid that kind of situation, right?
Yes. We have standard operating procedures.
And also as part of those procedures, one of the things to protect yourself from a liability standpoint is, if there's something that's significant that happens on the ranch, you want to put it in the log so later, if it happens, it could be documented, correct, for liability purposes.
Personally, I would do that myself. I'm relying on the discretion of the officers.
Well, you would expect, they worked under your supervision, correct?
Yes.
They worked under your direction?
Right.
And you would expect that if any significant event occurred on the ranch, that would be documented in the reports, correct?
Reports or gate logs, yes.
At some place where
Yes.
something would happen that's out of the ordinary, that would be something that you'd want to document?
Yes.
To show that if an incident occurred, that you took a response to it to prevent it from happening again, correct?
Yes.
You want to document that event, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And as part of that policy, you had a rule that the golf carts couldn't go off the ranch, right?
They're not designed to go off the property. They shouldn't go off, no.
I just asked.
Yes. Yes.
And if somebody tried to drive a golf cart off the ranch, they would be stopped by the gate person and turned around and told to head back out, correct? Head back to the ranch?
That would be our procedure.
That would be a standard procedure?
It would be our policy.
Okay. And somebody who let a person off the ranch with the cart would be in a little bit of trouble, wouldn't they, with you?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Let me rephrase it. I'm sorry, Judge. It would be a violation of your policies for somebody at the gate to allow somebody off the ranch with a go-kart. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to. Are you talking about a go-kart or a golf cart?
Golf cart.
It would be against our policy to allow someone underage, without driving privileges, to leave the property.
So, underage would be anybody 16 and below?
Driving age, yes.
Or below 16?
Driving age, yes.
And the same thing was true of the quads?
Yes.
In other words, there was a rule at the gate that you just didn't let somebody off with the quads?
Yes.
Now, in 2003, did you know how old Gavin Arvizo was?
No.
He was small for his age in 2003, was he not?
I don't know.
Objection. Calls for speculation. Lack of foundation.
Sustained.
He was a rather small person, was he not?
No.
In 2003?
I don't know how old Gavin was at the time.
What's your estimate?
My estimate would be that he was 15.
15? And how old do you think Star was?
At least 12 or 13 years old.
You told the jury that the reason that there's a notation in the logs about the boys not leaving the ranch was because they had been driving vehicles around the ranch, correct? The Navigator and the van?
Objection. Your Honor. That misstates the testimony.
Well, let me go back. I'll clarify that. I thought that's what she said. I'll withdraw the question, Your Honor.
All right.
Was the reason that the notation that Mr. Sanger showed you up there on the board about the boys not to leave the ranch related to their driving of the Navigator or the van?
Yes.
Okay, so I was right. You don't have to answer that. At any time in any of those logs, did you ever see a notation that documented the fact that those boys were driving those cars?
No.
And you say that the policy of the ranch is to lock the key to the cellar in the safe, correct?
On certain occasions it is.
But the policy of the ranch was to leave keys in the cars on the ranch? You didn't secure them somewhere?
No.
You don't think that would be a liability problem if somebody got in one of those cars and drove it off?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Did it ever occur to you as the chief of security during this period of time that there was a liability issue to the ranch by leaving those keys in the cars unattended?
No.
Did you change the procedure at any time? Are they still left in the carts?
At this time, I believe they are. Some vehicles are locked.
I assume locked, and the keys aren't locked inside of them. So they're placed somewhere else, correct?
No. Correct.
And it's also true that at no time during the time that you've been employed by that ranch do you recall there ever being an entry in a log that children were not to leave the ranch, correct?
That's correct.
And that, as a matter of fact, on those occasions you told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that, for instance, Wade Robson was at the ranch without supervision. You don't find any entry saying, "Don't let Wade Robson leave the ranch unsupervised," correct?
Objection. Assumes facts. Compound.
Overruled. You may answer.
Answer?
Yes. There's nothing in the logs to that effect, right?
I'd have to go through all the gate logs.
Do you have any recollection, as the head of security, that there was ever an entry like that with regard to Wade Robson?
No.
Objection. Lack of foundation.
Overruled.
With regard to Brett Barnes, you've told the jury already that he's been there on occasion without his parents. Do you ever recall, during the time that he was on that ranch, that there was a notation in the logs that he was not to leave the ranch?
I did not see one.
I'm sorry. I was trying to object. Objection. 1 second. Objection. Lack of foundation.
They can't hear.
Objection. Lack of foundation as to the 1990 gate logs, 90 to 93.
Sustained.
During the time that you were employed on the ranch as a security officer between the time period of 1991 and 1993, you've told us that Wade Robson visited the ranch, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, you would have been one of the officers who would review the entries on the log to make sure you do your job, correct?
Yes.
And you would have done that on a daily basis when you came to work, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And do you recall any log entries during that period of time in which somebody wrote a note saying, "Don't let Wade Robson leave this ranch"?
No.
And with regard to Brett Barnes, during the same time period that you were working as a security officer and you were reviewing those logs, did you ever see an entry that said anything about not letting Brett Barnes leave the ranch?
No.
Now, if I were to ask you the same question about Jordan Chandler, your answer would be the same, correct?
Correct.
In fact, the entry that was made on the logs that you testified to, that Mr. Sanger showed you, was the first and only time you've ever seen that kind of entry made on a ranch log, correct?
Yes.
Are you familiar with some boys from Santa Ynez called the Coltree Brothers?
Objection. Beyond the scope of direct.
Overruled.
I think I'm entitled to, I think. It's overruled. You can answer. Are you familiar with the Coltree Brothers?
Yes.
And they were visitors at the ranch quite often, is that correct, during this time period, 2003?
I believe after that time period.
You don't recall them being on the ranch during 2003?
Yes, but after the February time.
Yeah. No.
Not during the same time.
That's fair.
Yes.
During 2003 they were there?
Yes.
And by your own statement to investigators, I think you described them as wild, correct?
Yes.
Objection. Move to strike. Calls for hearsay. Also not relevant as to the time period that what we're talking about.
Overruled. The answer was, yes. Next question.
In fact, while they were on the ranch one day, they egged your car so bad that you had to get it repainted, correct?
Objection. Your Honor. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't know if it was them.
Somebody did, correct?
Someone did, yes.
And they were on the ranch at that time?
Yes.
Alright. During the time that you were employed at the ranch, were you ever aware of who was sent out to buy adult magazines for Mr. Jackson?
No.
Did you receive in your office a package of adult magazines that came from Japan?
Yes.
And those were, the contents of the envelope were from Mr. Jackson's luggage that was mailed back to Neverland after he had gone to Japan, correct?
I don't know if it was from Japan, but they were left in my office.
And they were adult materials, correct?
Yes.
And you described them, I think, as very graphic?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Sneddon asked you about various guests coming with or without parents, one parent or the other. Do you remember that, at the beginning of your cross-examination?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the Arvizos. To your knowledge, the Arvizos came with at least their father the first several times they came. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did he supervise them?
Yes.
And then there was a period of time in 2002 when they came with Chris Tucker. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's Chris Tucker the entertainer, right?
Yes.
And was Mr. Jackson on the premises or not, or sometimes on and sometimes off?
Yes.
The latter?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Alright, was Mr. Tucker supervising the Arvizo kids while he was there?
Yes.
Alright, and then after that, the Arvizo kids came with their mother. That was in February of 2003, correct?
Yes.
And she was on the property most of the time that they were on the property, is that right?
Yes.
She was not there some of the time, though?
Correct.
Alright, now, you just indicated that. You were asked about these gate logs going back to 91 to 93. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And from 1991 to 1993, you were not the chief of security, is that correct?
That's correct.
So it was not your job to review all of the gate logs, is that right?
That's correct.
It was your job to look at the gate logs when you came on your shift to see if there was any information that you should pick up for use during your shift, correct?
Correct.
That would include figuring out who's on the property, if there are any special instructions and that sort of thing, right?
Yes.
Alright, for the purpose of testifying here today, did Mr. Sneddon or anybody on his staff show you the gate logs from 1991 to 1993?
No.
Have you had a chance to review those gate logs in recent years?
No.
Alright, now, you indicated that the only entry that you recall with regard to children not leaving the ranch was that one entry on February the 19th?
Yes.
Alright, and that entry was only for that particular day, is that correct?
That's correct.
It was not carried forward beyond February the 19th?
Correct. No.
And the entry, that was the first entry, so it obviously didn't precede the 19th, correct?
Correct.
You indicated that one of the reasons was let me withdraw that. You indicated that one of the reasons that the notation was in the log, you believed, was because of the kids driving the adult vehicles, correct? The Navigator and the Astrovan and so on?
Correct.
Were there any other factors related to that entry that you're aware of?
Well, the children were there unsupervised as well, so.
Okay, so there wasn't a parent there, or somebody like Chris Tucker, to make the call as to whether or not they should leave and who they should leave with. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you recall if Hamid Moslehi was on the property at that time?
Yes.
Was he?
I'm sorry?
Was he?
Yes, he was.
Alright, and did he leave that day?
I believe he did. There was an entry above that said that he was there.
Well, I'll object as lack of foundation. No personal knowledge.
Overruled.
I think the answer is in.
The answer is in.
Do you have a personal recollection of him being there around that time?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if he left later that day with the children, with the Arvizo children?
I don't know.
Alright, but if you wanted to find out, you would probably be able to look in the log and determine whether that's the case or not. Is that correct?
Sure.
And generally, if somebody leaves the ranch at the exact same minute, if there are a group of people or a number of people who leave at the exact same minute, it generally means they're in the same vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I think you were asked, and I may be wrong about this. I think you were asked if Wade Robson and Brett Barnes had behavior problems. Let me ask you, did they?
No.
Were they polite? Impolite? How would you characterize them as kids?
They were very kind and considerate.
Okay. Did they ever, to your knowledge, get into an adult vehicle and start driving around without permission?
No.
Okay. Going back towards the beginning of your cross-examination, Mr. Sneddon asked you about Frank Cassio. Do you recall?
Yes.
And he asked you if Frank Cassio started using a different name, that is, Tyson, at some point. Do you recall?
Yes.
Did, in fact, the entire Cassio family start using a different last name?
Yes.
Did they all ask to be called Tyson instead of Cassio?
Yes.
Did you honor that request?
When I could remember.
Okay. Now, with regard to Frank Cassio Tyson, you were asked whether or not he was a close, trusted friend of Mr. Jackson, I think, something to that effect. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did his relationship with Mr. Jackson have difficulties at one point?
Object. Lack of foundation.
Sustained.
And vague.
Okay.
Sustained as to foundation.
All right. You had indicated that Frank Cassio was a close, trusted friend of Mr. Jackson.
Yes.
Correct? Was that consistently true, or was there any change in that relationship from time to time?
Object. Calls for a conclusion. Lack of foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, it did change on occasion.
Was there a time when Mr. Cassio threw a big party?
Yes.
And did that result in the depletion of ranch resources?
Yes.
Okay. Did that cause a problem between Mr. Cassio and Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
You were asked about the key to the wine cellar, and the part that I'd like to get to is how many keys were there to the wine cellar, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, there were a set of keys in the house for the housekeeping staff, a set of keys in the security office.
Did somebody walk around with those keys, a security officer walk around with the keys, or were they there at the office to be retrieved?
They're on a key ring and they're kept with the supervisor.
Okay. And when you say, security office, are we talking about the office that's adjacent to the garage and the video library?
Yes.
So obviously, if somebody had to use it, they'd take the key ring and they go use it, right?
Yes.
Are they supposed to put it back?
Yes.
Does that always happen?
No, not always. It stays on them sometimes.
There was a question. I think the question was about opening the wine cellar. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But in any event, at the time of the search, did you have the keys for the wine cellar?
Not on me.
Okay. And the officers who wanted to search asked to have the key for the wine cellar. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you retrieve the security keys or the housekeeping's keys?
I don't recall at the time. But I may have. I was talking with the housekeepers. I was actually in the house at the time. So to quickly retrieve the keys, I may have grabbed the keys from them or asked for them from the housekeeper.
So that, at that time, to your knowledge, there was a set of keys for the security staff?
Yes.
All right. And that included the key to the wine cellar. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, there were questions about the door to Mr. Jackson's private area, sometimes called his bedroom or bedroom suite, that area, all right? And you said something about them being locked from the inside. Do you recall that?
Mr. Sneddon asked a question.
All right. Is it possible to open that door from the outside?
With a key, yes, I imagine so.
Okay. Was there a keypad, an electronic keypad there?
Yes.
And did certain people have the combination to that keypad other than Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Who would have had that?
Whoever was cleaning his room at the time. Certain guests. And certain house staff.
All right. Did security have the keypad number to his private quarters?
No.
Did security have the keypad numbers to other doors in the house?
Back door only.
How about the front door?
No.
So if security needed to get inside the house, they would have to go through, without a key, they'd have to go through the back door?
Yes.
That's the door most people use anyway to come in and out of that house, is that right?
Yes.
If you're visiting formally, you're an invited guest, you come through the front door, I take it, correct?
Yes.
At least when you arrive, right?
Yes.
And thereafter, if you're staying overnight, you probably just go through the back door, right?
Correct.
Now, is there also a key, as opposed to a keypad? Is there a key to unlock the back door?
Yes.
And security had one of those?
Yes.
And is it a different key or the same key to unlock the front door?
Yes.
Did security have one of those?
Yes.
And security did not have, to your knowledge, the keypad number or the key for Mr. Jackson's room.
No, we did not.
Now, you had the key to go into the back patio, is that right?
It's only locked. There's just a lock, not a keypad.
Okay, but a key?
A key, yes.
So did security have a key to go through the patio?
Yes.
Alright, so you could get in. If you needed to get in through the patio, you could go in through that way. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you have a key to the back door to Mr. Jackson's suite?
I don't believe we did.
You never had occasion to try it, in any event, is that correct?
No.
Now, you were asked whether or not you were put in the position of being the bad guys sometimes, is that right?
Yes.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, our position is to make sure that the guests are being in a safe position, they're not being jeopardized. Mr. Jackson is the host. And it's his position to be gracious and accommodating. That was our job. Bad guys is more of a bad guys. Not that we were bad, but it was part of our job, and we did it consistently. And that's what we did.
Alright, so, are you complaining about being put in that position?
No.
Okay, I kept interrupting. You're getting a drink of water, so I waited there for a moment.
Okay.
In other words, that was part of your function, was to be the ones that would draw the line on some of the safety issues, particularly with regard to the equipment. Is that right?
Yes.
Sometimes people want to ride Mr. Jackson's Harley?
Yes.
And are there times when you'd have to be the bad guy with regard to that?
Yes.
And you'd do that graciously as well?
Yes.
Okay, now, I've noticed Mr. Sneddon is using the exhibit. I don't object to that, but I'm going to use it in just a minute, so, okay. Thank you. May I ask leave of the court to approach the witness with the exhibit, or with the book, and it includes Exhibit 335, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you. There's some water spilled there, so, people do that all the time.
Counsel, what's the date? Just give me the date.
Just 1 second. I'm going to start with March the 6th.
Thank you.
And page 00194 of Exhibit 335. And, Miss Silva, you might want to pull that closer to you, whatever is comfortable for you to read, because I'm going to ask you to go through the logs from February the 6th, 2003, through March the 12th, 2003, and tell us, if you would, whether or not you're on the property each day and what your hours were.
From February 6th.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. The document speaks for itself. It's in evidence. Best evidence rule.
Well, the best evidence rule, anyway, I won't argue.
Overruled.
On this day of March 6th of 2003, I was already on the property. I was carried over from the previous day, and so I got off my shift at 6:30 a.m.
You know what I really meant to do, now that I've said that out loud, is I meant to go back to February.
Oh, okay.
That was the problem. What I'd like to do is just get an idea of what your hours were during that time. You indicated on cross-examination that you could look at the logs and talk about what hours you were there. And I believe you said you thought you were there late from time to time. So if you can give us just a quick idea as you look through the logs. You can do it day by day for a while, but give us a quick idea of what your general working days were like at that time.
On February 7th, 2003, I was carried over from the previous shift and went off duty at 0152 hours.
So that meant you were there the night of February 6th, and you were there past midnight and then you went home. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, alright.
February 13th, 2003, I was carried over from the previous shift and was signed out at 7 a.m.
So if you look back to the 12th, Give us an idea of when you started.
I started at 1,500 hours, which is 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
So you went all night till the next morning?
Yes.
Alright, go ahead.
On the 15th, I was carried over from the previous day and continued to work and carried over again, and I left my shift at 2,125, which is 9 p.m.
Okay, well, just for the fun of it, go back to the day before. Don't move your hand. Go back to the day before, when you were carried over, and see when you started the day before.
I came in at 4 p.m.
So 4 p.m., the whole night, the whole next day, and didn't leave until the day after that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, as Mr. Sneddon said, the records speak for themselves. So if somebody wanted to go through, they could figure out exactly when you were there. Is that right?
Yes.
But it's safe to say that you worked many evenings and many nights. Is that correct?
Yes.
You were asked if you could remember specific occasions that Mr. Jackson was together with the Arvizo children. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said you can't recall specifically. I think you recalled one dinner at the teepee, is that right?
Yes.
And was that, how many people were at that dinner? Do you know?
There were other people there. Exactly how many and who was there, I can't recall.
Okay, other than that one dinner with a number of people, and the Arvizos being amongst them, you say you don't have any other specific recollection during that time period in 2003 of what Mr. Jackson was doing, if anything, with the Arvizo kids.
I don't recall ever seeing them together during that time frame.
Okay, so if they were together, you just didn't see them. Is that safe to say?
I didn't see them.
Okay, were there times during the February or March period where the Arvizo children were staying? The Arvizo boys were staying in the guest unit?
They were assigned a guest unit, yes.
So you didn't go to check to make sure they were in there?
No.
And this incident with the Coltree brothers, how do you say that?
I don't know.
However you say the brothers' names, the incident you talked about where somebody egged your car, first of all, you don't know if they did it, right?
I didn't see them do it.
And secondly, that did not occur at a time when the Arvizos were on the ranch, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, no further questions.
Just a couple of questions. It won't be long.
Okay.
Do you recall describing the atmosphere at the ranch with regard to children as being one that you, as a mother, would not allow your children to participate in?
Yes.
Objection. Calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
I'm asking about her statement.
That's sustained.
Based upon what you saw at the ranch and your observations as a security officer during the period of time from 1991 to 2003, did you form an opinion with regard to whether you would ever allow your children to participate in the activities at the ranch as you saw them?
As a security officer, no.
As a mother?
Yes.
And that opinion is that you would not, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Now, you said that the entire Casio family chose to have themselves referred to as Tyson.
Yes.
Did I understand you correctly?
Yes.
And when was that decision made, to your knowledge?
I can't recall it this time.
Was it a decision that was made during February and March of 2003, or after?
I believe it was around that time.
Do you, in reviewing those logs for Mr. Sanger, do you see any occasion in those logs, from February 7 through March the 12th, where any member of the Casio family is referred to as Tyson, other than Frank?
I would have to go through each page.
Do you want to do that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
What were the dates?
From February the 7th until March the 12th.
I have one entry here.
What's the date on that entry?
The date of entry is February 28, 2003.
And the name?
There's an entry in the directive part of our log.
And the name?
Tyson. Casio family will go by Tyson family.
That's on the 28th?
Yes.
The family wasn't on the ranch that day, was it?
The gate log shows they were on property.
They're not listed by Tyson on the log, are they?
No, they're carried over from the previous day. The The gate entry log was at 1700 hours. They left property at 1917.
And the first date where Frank Cassio's name is transferred to Tyson is on March 1st. Isn't that correct?
Continue looking?
Go ahead and check it.
Thank you. That's correct.
Up to that time, it had been Cassio all the way?
Yes.
Are you familiar with a person by the name of Vinny Amen?
Yes.
And he was at the ranch about the same time as Mr. Tyson during February and March, correct?
Yes.
And do you have any idea why Mr. Amen's name was changed from Vinny Amen to Vinny Black on March 1st?
Beyond the scope of redirect.
Counsel opened the logs up.
Objection sustained.
So your testimony is, then, that with regard to security, and you being the chief of security at the ranch, that you took greater precautions with regard to the key to the wine cellar than you did the keys to the cars?
I'm going to object. That's argumentative.
Sustained.
No further questions.
Don't put the book away.
Okay.
The book is open. Let's just be clear. I think this is clear, but it is February 28, 2003. That is the actual date when the directive came out to refer to the entire Cassio family by the last, as Tyson.
Yes.
That wasn't English. Let me try that again. It was February 28, 2003, that the directive came out that the entire Cassio family should be referred to as Tyson. Is that correct?
Yes. February 28th.
And so, as far as you're concerned, when people remembered it, that's what they were supposed to do. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if somebody came through the gate and was logged in as a Cassio, instead of a Tyson, would that necessarily mean that someone was disobeying the directive?
No.
Object. Calls for a conclusion. Speculation.
Sustained.
Okay. Was this a preference that was? Let me withdraw that. Who informed you that that was supposed to be the case, that as of February 28th, the Cassio family should be referred to as Tyson?
The gate log shows that it was per Joe Marcus.
So you did not talk to Joe Marcus about that, is that correct?
No.
And you saw it in the gate log along with other security staff, is that correct?
Right. Or I was briefed by a supervisor about it.
Okay. As far as you know, did the staff make an effort to comply with that request?
Object. Speculation. Conclusion.
Sustained.
As the head of security, was it brought to your attention that anybody was deliberately disobeying that instruction?
No.
And do you know, beyond it coming from Joe Marcus, do you have any information as to who made the request?
No.
All right, you indicated. Your Honor, this may reopen slightly, but let me ask this question and see how far we get. As you were going through the gate logs just now, did you come across the entry where the golf carts were taken away from both Shane Brando and Gavin Arvizo?
I don't recall the date, but I'm sure it's in here.
Did you see it as you were flipping through this time?
No, I don't believe I saw it in there.
Okay.
I didn't grab the page and see it, but.
You weren't looking for it. All right, I won't ask you to go back through it. It's either in there or it isn't. Let me ask you, you indicated that you would have a concern as a mother about having your child stay at the ranch. Is that right?
Not concerned for them staying there, but perhaps some of the activity was beyond my comfort level.
Okay, now, without going into details about your private life, but you have children, right?
Yes, I have 2 daughters.
Okay, you have grandchildren?
Yes, twins.
Did you ever bring your family members to Family Day?
Yes.
So your daughters as well?
Yes.
So they've been there and they've played at the ranch and had fun on Family Day, correct?
Yes.
Your concern was from your own personal standpoint as a mother, that you would not want to bring your children there on a regular basis, is that right?
On a regular basis, no.
All right, that's fine. Okay, I have no further questions.
Nothing further.
Thank you. You may step down. Call your next witness.
The next witness will be Ramon Velasco. And Mr. Velasco is going to be assisted by the Spanish language interpreter, the court interpreter.
When you get to the witness stand, please raise your right hand and face the clerk.
Yes, I do swear.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Ramon Velasco.
May I spell, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ramon Velasco. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Velasco, you asked to be assisted by a Spanish language interpreter in court, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you, and we respect that choice. You do speak English to a certain extent, is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Spanish is your first language?
Yes.
And you feel more comfortable speaking in Spanish than in English, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, let me ask you if you know the gentleman seated right here.
Yes, I do know him.
Who is that?
Mr. Michael Jackson.
Okay, and have you worked for Mr. Jackson at Neverland Ranch?
Yes, I did work.
And when did you go to work at Neverland Ranch?
I started in the year 1989. And I stopped around 1999.
Did you work continuously during that period of time?
Not the whole time.
Did you take any breaks from working there?
Well, I injured my back, and I was operated on.
All right.
And I was given the opportunity to return again.
All right, so you were off for a period of time with a back injury?
Yes, correct.
When was that?
1991.
How long were you off?
About 8 months.
All right, so other than that 8-month period, you've been a regular employee at the ranch?
Yes, of course.
And what was your first job assignment when you went to work at the ranch?
Taking care that the game would not eat the flowers.
Okay, did you win or did the game win?
The deer won.
Okay, so you worked as a gardener for a period of time?
Yes, of course.
About how long was that?
I cannot recall exactly.
Was it a matter of months or years?
Several years.
All right, and then after doing, or working as a gardener, did you take on another job?
Yes.
And what was that?
Assisting the cook by washing dishes.
All right.
And other things.
Okay, and how long did you do that?
Several years.
And you left employment at the ranch in 1999, correct?
Yes.
What was your job at the time you left employment?
I worked full-time in the kitchen.
All right, and you assisted the cook?
No, at that time I was the one in charge.
Oh, you were the cook. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, now, when you were working as the cook, first of all, you were working as the assistant to the cook and then as the cook. Did you work in the kitchen in the main house?
Yes, the whole house.
And when did you first start working in the house?
I cannot recall exactly.
Was it after you came back from your back injury?
Yes, correct.
Okay, do you recall how long after your back injury?
Could you please repeat that question?
That's fine. Do you recall how long it was after you returned to work from your back injury that you came to work in the house?
Right after my operation, it was almost immediately after. It was part-time. Oh, partly outside, partly inside.
So you started working partly inside in 1991, then?
Both places.
And then when did you start working full-time inside?
Really, I cannot recall. I wasn't in one place or the other.
All right, now, at the time you left, you were working full-time inside, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, now, do you have a nephew?
Yes, of course.
And did your nephew also work at the ranch?
Yes.
Okay, is that Carlos?
Yes, correct.
Full name is Carlos Velasco?
Correct.
First of all, let me ask you about Jason Francia. Do you remember Jason Francia?
Yes, I do.
Did your nephew spend time with Jason Francia?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Okay, did you see your nephew spend time with Jason Francia?
No, I do not recall that.
Okay, do you know if your nephew went to school in the early 90s?
I do know that he did at that time, but I don't know the exact year.
And your nephew Carlos went to school in Santa Maria?
Yes, of course.
Do you know if he went to the same school as Jason Francia?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Alright. Now, did you know Blanca Francia?
Yes, I do.
And who is Blanca Francia?
What is it, the response that you're seeking? If I know her as a friend or.
Okay, I forgot what I asked, the exact words. But in any event, did Blanca Francia work at the ranch?
Correct.
Alright, and what was her job when you first met her?
She would clean Michael's room.
Alright, when you first met her, did you get along with her?
Objection. Relevancy.
Foundation.
All right, overruled.
What was the question?
When you first met with her, did you get along with her?
Yes.
Okay, at some point, did you have occasion to change your opinion of Blanca Francia?
Objection. Relevancy.
Let me just withdraw it, then. I'll make it easier, okay? If I may.
All right.
At some point, did you notice that Blanca Francia's behavior with other employees was impolite?
Objection. Leading and relevancy.
Sustained.
On?
Both.
Did you see Blanca Francia have encounters with other employees at the ranch?
Objection. Ambiguous and relevancy.
Overruled. You may answer.
Would you please repeat the question?
Could I ask, please?
Yes. Could it be read back?
Did you see Blanca Francia have encounters with other employees at the ranch?
I did not see it. I heard it.
Did you hear her talk to other employees?
Yes.
How did she conduct herself with other employees?
Objection. Relevancy. Hearsay. Calls for a conclusion.
Sustained.
Dare I ask, all three?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure where you're going, so the foundation and conclusion is a valid objection. But maybe if I understood where you were going. Do you want to approach on this?
Could we, please? Discussion held off the record at sidebar. Alright, now, while you were working at the ranch, do you know how long Blanca Francia was also there at the ranch?
She was there before me, but I don't know how many years.
And she left. She left long before you did, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, during the time you were working at the ranch, do you know if there was a wine cellar?
Yes, there was.
Was the wine cellar kept locked?
Yes, the whole time.
Were children allowed in the wine cellar unaccompanied by Mr. Jackson or an adult or somebody in a position of authority?
Not that I was aware of.
Where was the key to the wine cellar kept during the time you were there?
It was behind the door.
I'm going to object as to relevancy, given the time that he left the ranch.
Sustained.
Did you observe the Robson family at the ranch?
I did not personally see them. I was not really interested in who the people were. I was there to help them.
Okay, alright. You saw a number of families visit the ranch, is that right?
Yes, of course.
And did you see Mr. Jackson engage in play with family members who visited the ranch?
Yes, of course.
Did you see water balloon fights, for instance?
Yes, several times.
And during the time let me withdraw that. During the entire time that you were there, let me withdraw that. Did you ever see Mr. Jackson do anything inappropriate with any child?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Never. No, never.
Foundation.
Did you see whether or not Mr. Jackson, let me withdraw that. During the time you were working in the kitchen in particular, as an assistant and then as a chef, did Mr. Jackson have high standards for the food that you prepared?
Objection. Relevancy.
Sustained.
Well, how did he want his guests to be treated, as far as you were concerned?
The best.
Did Mr. Jackson himself complain about, for instance, food that he was served personally?
Objection. Relevancy.
Sustained.
Did Mr. Jackson ever complain to you that the food that was being served to the children or the adult guests was not adequate?
Yes, sometimes.
Did you feel that he was complaining unreasonably?
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled.
They were reasonable.
Okay, and now if I may ask that other question. Did Mr. Jackson ever complain about the food that was served to himself?
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled.
No, never.
Now, yesterday at almost 8 o'clock at night, Were you contacted by someone who indicated that they were a member of the sheriff's department?
Yes. There were 2 persons.
Was this by telephone or in person?
By telephone.
What were you doing when you were called?
I was working in my home.
Where were you working in your home?
Objection. Relevancy.
Sustained.
Okay, alright, I have no questions.
We'll take our break.
Okay.